Good evening. Just wanted to welcome you, Frazer. Thank you so much this evening for coming on the show with me. I appreciate it.
Well, not when you see my bill. You're going to have a different tune. No, it's nice to see you, and thank you for having me on the show, and it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. For all the folks that are out there, Frazer Smith, as I say in the opening, just a legend in California and radio history here. 70s and 80s. I grew up here in the Orange County area, and I used to listen to you growing up, and it was just unbelievable to be able to have the opportunity to have you on the show.
So you were the one that was listening. Okay.
I was, yeah.
I knew I had one listener.
I was absolutely out there. So what I wanted to do is that, really kind of start off a little bit by giving the audience perspective. Our audience is national, so we want to make sure that everybody kind of gets the view of your story, maybe starting in Detroit and the Kalamazoo area as you kind of got ready and you worked your way out to Los Angeles. And because the show really focuses a lot on merit and performance and stuff, is that I wanted to kind of break it up a little bit after you kind of set the big picture of your journey out here and kind of where you're at today, and then we'll kind of go backwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I would start in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where a lot of people think that's where Elvis wound up, if he is still alive. That's what they think, working at Burger King. And I started there, and I started in a little radio station. I was going to college there at Western Michigan University, and I'm going to already start dropping names. I was there with Tim Allen. Tim was one of my classmates there at Western, and we both had the same radio and television class. I guess you called it communications. And I started a little station, a little top 40 station called WYYY, which is what they asked themselves after they hired me. Why did we hire that? But I loved it because I had to learn everything. It was one of these little, it was a daytimer. It went off at nighttime. Okay. And you were the only one in the station. So you had to do the sports, you had to do the news. It was when you had the telewire, and you'd rip it off the wire and just, put it together and read it. And I had to start the records and turn on the equipment, turn off the equipment, make all the notations of where the numbers were on the equipment. And it took a lot of hustling around. You were working. Mm-hmm. And I think it was good because I learned how to do a little bit of everything. And in a certain way, and I suppose this is true for a lot of jobs, it really doesn't change that much as you go bigger. Mm-hmm. The equipment may get better. The coverage of the station was obviously bigger, but the same kind of basics.
So, Frazer, as you're going through that, when did you get to the point where you're like, I need to take this show on the road and head out to Los Angeles?
Well, I was doing my radio show in Detroit at this time, and I had Cheech and Chong on the show, and they said, well, you're pretty funny. You ought to try to come to L.A. So I thought, well, maybe I should, I'll why not? I'm young. I'll give it a shot. Mm-hmm. So I packed up everything a couple weeks later and just headed out here. And I was asking my friends, I had friends from Michigan out here. And I said, well, where do you think I should go to try to get on the air? And they said, well, K-Rock, because that's the tiniest station out here. That's still recognizable.
Pasadena at that
point. Pasadena. They're in Pasadena. And they were a little shop. Well, first we were in the Pasadena Hilton Hotel in a suite.
Oh, wow.
And I really thought I'd made a mistake because I'm like, what is this? Mm-hmm. But we moved across the street there to a little tiny building, and they were waiting to hopefully sell the station and then move into a bigger complex, which they did. But in the Pasadena Hilton, Van Halen was there. They were the house band.
Wow.
And nobody really knew them. They were sort of local legends around the Pasadena area and LA area, but they weren't known nationally. And so David Lee Roth would come across the street, climb up the fire escape, climb in through the window of K-Rock and kick in the door. And he'd go, dude, you got to play my test pressing, And okay, get out of here. Mm-hmm. And then he kept coming back. So I finally played Ain't Talking About Love, and that lit up the phones, which is how you could tell if you had a viral thing then. But That was my start, was K-Rock. Mm-hmm. And it went from, we went from last place to first place.
Wow.
Not because of me, but because at that time, all the new music was coming in, the new wave and the punk rock, and I'm sure you listened to it.
Oh, yeah.
And, Elvis Costello and the Police and the Sex Pistols and the Clash and everybody had not really been heard before in America. And we had Rodney Bingenheimer there. Remember Rodney?
On the Rock.
Rodney on the Rock.
Yep.
And his show was on right after mine. So we became buddies. And he would say things like, play these guys. And I go, well, I've never heard of the Police, except that they've been after me for years. But he said, just play it. Yeah. So you'd play it, and then all of a sudden everybody in town's listening to it. And I still remember emceeing the Police's first show in L.A. at the Whiskey.
Wow. Yeah, driving, we've been blessed enough to be here at the Comedy Store in L.A. and Hollywood here, and I was driving up Whiskey A Go-Go, all the big clubs, and, even for myself, growing up in California, it's still nostalgic for me coming down here to so much history, and I can't imagine from your perspective, because in that day, it was such a special time. LA was breaking a lot of the bands. And what would end up happening is that was the days like the bands came into the radio station. I mean, it was like the David Lee Roth getting you to play stuff. It was a lot of, and so one of my questions that kind of is to that is like, in my world of, in the professional consulting side, it's always hard to weed through the talent, to try to get to what's worth it. Perseverance pays when David Lee Roth kicks in a door, but I think, you've seen something there and you started to develop kind of an eye and an ear, for that. And I was just kind of curious if you could kind of help, our listeners kind of view like spotting talent. That's a big deal. And you seem to had a knack for that and historically too.
Well, thank you. I think, you kind of either have an ear or you don't. You can develop one, I guess, but I have to give a lot of the credit to Rodney because Rodney has a great ear and he could spot a real hit. Yep. And I always thought I had a pretty good ear for hits too on the radio, but Rodney much more so. And he had a club on Sunset called Rodney's English Disco, and if you would go in there on any given night, there'd be Led Zeppelin would be in there, The Who would be at another booth, and Elvis Costello. I mean, that's who hung out with him. And Rodney would tell me, well, these guys, you're going to love them. And I'd listen to him. I go, hey, that's pretty good. And I was used to basically meat and potatoes rock bands of that era. The Who and the Stones and Aerosmith and all the big bands. And I love them too. But I was able to, I think, make some picks on my own. One was Motley Crue, because I would go to the Rainbow, which is right next to the Roxy, the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and that's where all the bands hung out. All the up-and-coming bands would hang out at the Rainbow. And I'd walk in there, and I was kind of the big man on campus in town because I was the big DJ. So they would all come up to me, and it was a cassette era, and they would give me their cassettes. And I'd put them in my pockets. I'd leave there with my pockets bulging with cassettes, and I would never listen to them. Not to be a jerk, I just had a lot of work to do. Doing a morning show is pretty hard, and so I'd be up every day at 4 o'clock working on the show, and I really didn't listen to those tapes. And then one day I was bored and listened to the Motley Crue tape, and I go, hey, that's pretty good. And the song was Live Wire, and I played that on my show, and it exploded. So I guess I did have a knack for that. I think my comment to your question would be just to be open. To be open rather than saying, hey, I already know what I know. I don't need to hear anything else. You have to always be open to something new and willing to at least check out something new, because that's the only way you're going to find something new and fresh.
So, Frazer, let me ask you a question. To parallel something that drew me to you and really wanting to talk to you is in my professional world, I go between Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. I have a house in both places, and a lot of my work is in Washington, D.C. And the reason why I spend 90% of my time there is because that's where the client is. That's where the action's at. And,
sure.
And I'm fascinated by your story of coming out to L.A., and then you kind of had to live the life to be able to see where the talent was. And what I see as a challenge for a lot of the folks, whether you're trying to get in entertainment, business, whatever, people won't make the investment to go out. Like even tonight, I mean, we're in the Comedy Store. You're still out here, doing your thing, and people have to make that investment to go out to where the action is. So, what's your view to kind of taking us to modern day of the gladiator, you got to touch the dirt on the bottom of the stadium floor, right?
Yes, I did that, and it really didn't do much for my career. But just kidding. But you know what? You're right. You do have to do that. You can't sit at home. I think Bob Hope had a saying where he would say, you don't get any better staying home. And you really don't. The only way you can get any better is to go out and try. And you do have to force yourself out the door sometimes, because there's a lot of times you don't want to come out. You're tired or it's raining or whatever. And you just say, no, I'm going to go anyway. And that's kind of what you have to do, because you have to put in those hours. You have to, get that training. And there's only one way to do it. You can't do it sitting at home.
Yeah, I think what we're challenged with in the business community is after the pandemic, people are used to being at home. People are used to being on video, and I think a lot of times you can do a lot of stuff on video, and now people are trying to reorient themselves to being back in person. And I think what's been kind of interesting is even to equate it to kind of the business you're in, and my son Matthew is the same type of business. Is people come across really good on video, and then you get them in front of a crowd, and they don't know how to do that. It's a lot different being in person, and it seems like for someone like yourself, you're dealing in real time a lot of the stuff that you did in the 70s. So I was just kind of curious from your perspective of people doing it for real versus doing it through the video.
Well, yeah, they have now comedians who are just Zoom comedians, video comedians. And my friend is a development guy, Nick Goosen. He works for Adam Sandler. And Nick said to me a couple of years ago, he goes, Frazer's a whole new group of comics that have never performed live on stage. And they've only performed, they're video comedians. And, some of them are very good, very funny, but I think you have to have that live experience to really have the full experience, because at some point you're going to have to go in front of a live crowd. Even if you have a great, video podcast, eventually you're going to have to do that live. And a lot of times they'll book some of these people because they have a lot of numbers, but then they really haven't done the stage time, and they get in there and they're a little shaky. They haven't really, because it's not something you can fabricate. You have to put those hours in.
Right.
Before
we came in, you and I were having a discussion out in the hallway, and we were talking about you being down at the La Jolla Comedy Store down there. The first time that I had seen my son Matt perform in person with a big crowd was there. And it was funny as my wife and I go to see him, and, he's a funny guy, and he's done the time and grade and all that. But there was like 400 or 500 people. There was a lot of people in this room. And what I found, like a part that I'd never seen from him, was the crowd work, like reacting in real time where you don't lose it when people might heckle you, and it turns it into so funny that then they don't want him to get off the stage. And I don't know how you learn that other than hand-to-hand combat.
Well, that's why you see Matt down here every week, several nights a week. And Matt's part of a crew that is kind of the regular group that's here now. He's very talented, your son, and a great kid. And they all come down here, and they've got a good work ethic. And that reminds me of, they're kind of like classes. My class was, a class that a lot of the guys made it pretty big. That was, Bob Saget and Gary Shandling and all those guys. But they were here every night. They were here. And we were talking earlier about how all the big name comics were always here every night. Jim Carrey, every night. Roseanne, Leno, Letterman, they were here. I heard that Letterman emceed every night for like 5 years or something like that, 4 years. So they put in on that time. And that's why you're not thrown by the heckling. That's not why you can react to whatever, because you've had that stage time. You're comfortable up there. And the only way to get that comfort factor is to do it a lot.
Right. Taking us to modern day, so you're established, you've got eminence in this type of business, whether it's entertainment, radio, podcasting, you've got a brand to kind of deal with. When you go through and you look at where we're at today, again, I'm trying to always parallel your experience or experiences of my guests through what people like myself who are in a professional environment. We're always trying to be eminent. We're always trying to show that we have a certain skill set or certain expertise. how do you project yourself out there? Is it promotion? Is it just staying on the road? Or at this point, it's just the love of what you're doing, and that carries the day because you had something to build on. A lot of people that I work with don't have something to build on that's so historic that you have. So I was just kind of curious, kind of a modern day, what would be your view to be?
Well, I always think hard work is the key for whatever you do. And you really can't get around that, In terms of promotion, there's so many new ways to promote things with the internet and social media. And I have to admit, I'm way behind, actually. I do very little of that, but everyone else does and everyone else should. It's just a way you need to learn that because that's the best way to promote yourself nowadays. Mm-hmm. And promotion is king because you can have the best product regardless of what business you're in, but if people don't know about it, you're not going to do well. So you have to have that balance of really having your product down and then being able to promote it somehow. Mm-hmm. I was able to do that on the radio and I made a conscious effort to say my name every 20 seconds, which people were very annoyed by that. But what it did for me was it got my name out there. I have a name that is kind of an unusual name, so it became kind of a hook, and I used the radio for that. Everything was kind of self-promotion, and then I would make a joke out of that. But I think that's key is learning to use the new tools of the day, like you're doing a podcast now, and that's a great thing, and you're going to benefit from this. You're reaching new people, and you're reaching your people that you already have. So yeah, you just have to kind of study the social media, learn how to do that, and that's one of the best ways to promote. These days, that's the best way to promote stuff.
Yeah, thank you. So where you sit here today and you start to look at projects and you try to assess where do I want to spend my time, a lot of different options today. Podcasts, you can do comedy. You and I talked, you definitely do a tremendous amount of comedy and stand-up comedy. I've noticed a lot of activity that, especially with your coordination and your friendships with the owner of the Laugh Factory and stuff like that out there. Again, drawing parallels, the networking seems to be something that seems to be very helpful. What do you do to maintain your networks? You and I talked about there was comedians back in the day that they just don't come to clubs anymore. They used to hone their skills here, but they also used to kind of keep a connection and keep fresh.
Well, you have to for a while, but when you make it, it's a little different. But it's really true. You're either networking or you're not working. That's what I always say. And
that's good. And,
it's true. You have to do that. It's part of the job. And it's actually very important. And, it's just really basic people skills. You just have to be friendly and open again and willing to start conversations and to create friendships.
Right.
And you never know where those will take you. But I've been fortunate enough to get to know a lot of the owners of the clubs are my friends, and that certainly comes in handy.
Doing a little bit of research about some of the stuff that you talk about, you mentioned on a couple shows that you really like document type stories or documentary type activity you'd see on YouTube and follow stories. And, so when I was seeing that, I was thinking, you have so much history of a very special time period to, look at and capture. And, and I brought in this book here today, the Cornflakes with John Lennon, which is a Robert Hilburn book. He was a writer.
I know Robert, yeah.
Yeah, for LA Times.
Yeah, sure.
Music critic. And as a guy that sat on the side, this guy, self-proclaimed nerdish type of guy that was sort of like, he was like you, he had connections with everybody, but he was on the backstage of that, writing about it. And,
I knew Robert, yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah, very good writer, and worked with all the big bands. He really championed a lot of bands and gave me a couple nice articles too back in the day. So I always liked Hilburn. I guess what was the question that?
So when you look at this and you're going out there and you're seeing that. Getting out there and kind of keeping the connections and that whole network. How can you step back away when your show? There's a lot on you battling it out as you kind of went from K-Rock to KLOS to KMET, but everybody was chasing you a lot of the times in that process. today you can go and see video clips or it was recorded, but how did you stay up and remain competitive? What was your mode of doing that, and how do you think that would work out today? And because you're competing for ratings back then, that was your big deal. You really kind of climbed and jumped over the competition, but you got to stay there.
Well, it's never easy to stay there. It's always harder to stay there than people think. It's like, sports. I mean, a boxer wins the world championship, but then he's got to fight all the other top boxers. Yeah. So you do have to stay in shape. You have to keep your mind sharp. You have to do your homework. And that's what I always try to do. Prep is important, as you know, and for almost anything. And really the key to me is staying on top of your prep. If you stay on top of things, you stay on top of what's going on today. I'm fortunate that my style of stand-up is basically like the old Carson style, which is an old school style, but seems to resonate today still. And fortunately, but what that basically is stuff out of the news. So I find I have to constantly be watching the news. It's hard to get away from it these days, but that's what I try to do, is just stay up to date on what's going on.
As we get ready to kind of close this off, I was just kind of curious, from your view, where you're at now, any projects, anything that you're focused on that you look ahead that would be interesting that you would want to go through, or, what do you see in the next couple of years from where you're at?
Well, I have that yak farm in Costa Rica that I think is going to explode. Not the yak, but the actual farm. No, basically for me, I'm working on a project now that we were talking about off mic. It's called 1979. It's about my early days at K-Rock Radio and how we went from last place with a motley bunch of knucklehead DJs to beating everybody and coming in first.
Right.
And it's a great story, and it involves a lot of the bands that are big now and a lot of interesting cameos. And I have a big producer who's interested in doing this project. So that's one thing I have. I also have a movie script out there right now, and I have that with the Adam Sandler people, and it's called Porch Pirates. And it's about these porch pirates who are stealing Amazon packages, and then they steal the wrong package. They open it up, and it sends them back to the days of real pirates. So they have to navigate that situation. And then I have a bunch of other TV sitcom ideas. I'm trying to get on the Jimmy Fallon show with my stand-up. I just recently sent them a tape that I taped at Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa, and constantly working on projects, that I want to try to do. Mostly TV, but also a few movie ideas.
Yeah, no, that's great, Frazer. Well, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to be on the show. It's really exciting to meet you. Like I said, you've done so much stuff, and being a native Californian, and I hope to be able to kind of help perpetuate that too across the nation. The people hear this because, you were the expert on catchphrases. Phrase versus Frazer Smith.
Too hip.
Gotta go.
The party animal. Come on, I was the OG party animal, man.
The party animal.
Yeah.
So
I'm still standing, folks. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
You're representing the LBC, buddy.
There you go.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the very best. You're a good guy, and you're a very intelligent guy, and your son is talented. Maddie's got a lot of potential there, and so do you. Congratulations on your new position, and I know you're going to do great things, and you have a heart to help people, and that's important.
Oh, thank you, Frazer. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.